Hey everyone, Bill Lethman here for MoneyEvolution.com. In today's video, we're going to be talking about prioritizing your retirement goals. So if you're somebody that's been saving money for a while towards your retirement, starting to build up some bigger balances in those accounts, and you're really trying to figure some of this stuff out, maybe figure out how much money you're going to need to spend in retirement, what we're going to be talking about in today's video are some of the big levers that you can move that's going to help to bring you maybe a little bit closer to some of those goals. But real quick, before we get into the content of today's video, if you really want to take a deep dive on this and you're really getting serious about some of the retirement planning that you're doing, we have a course called the Retirement Time Machine that's going to dive into all of these different aspects of your retirement. We've got some great worksheets that'll help you to really put this stuff together, get your retirement plans organized, and really answer some of the biggest questions that you have related to your retirement. So head over to retirementtimemachine.com. On that page, there's a spot to enter your email address, and you can be notified for our next open enrollment period. All right, so let's jump right in. So one of the very first things that we're going to need to understand as we start putting together some of our plans for retirement is going to be what are the expenses that we have. And we've talked about this pretty extensively on the channel here. I really do think it's probably the most important thing for all of us to really understand as we go into retirement. It's also probably one of the more difficult things for a lot of people to really get their arms around, because I think for a lot of us, our expenses are changing all the time. And so as we look at the expenses for your retirement, we're going to want to look at this in a couple of different phases that we might be going through. So one of those phases is going to be, of course, what are the expenses that we have today or right now? And if we're still working, maybe we still have a mortgage and we're trying to pay that mortgage off. Maybe we still have kids at home. Maybe we're paying for college for our kids. So it's likely that right now, our expenses might be a little bit higher today than what they might be as we go into retirement. But we're going to really want to understand what those expenses are, because that's going to be the foundation that's going to lead us to understanding what those expenses are going to be as we go into the early part of retirement and then into the later parts of our retirement. So we're going to really want to understand that. And we're also going to want to understand the cash flow. And that's something we get into a lot of detail with our private clients that we do financial planning for. It's also something we get into a lot of detail with some great worksheets in the Retirement Time Machine course there. But understanding the income that you have and the expenses and how much money may be left over, how maybe some of those expenses are going to change. So maybe let's say in 2 years your mortgage is going to be paid off and you'll have some extra cash flow that could free up some ability to save more money towards your retirement if you feel like maybe you're a little bit behind on some of your retirement savings. So really understanding that cash flow now, and what are the things today that you're spending money on that may be different than what those might be as you go into retirement. Now, when it comes to your retirement expenses, generally I kind of break these up into two different components. We talk a lot about early retirement, and we talk about what we say is full retirement age. And so for a lot of us, if we retire early, especially if we retire prior to Medicare, as an example, is a good one. A lot of times we'll have higher medical expenses in those early years of retirement than we would at our full retirement age. For a lot of us too, if we're especially retiring early, we might have some early years where maybe our expenses are going to be quite a bit different than what they're going to be down the road. And we've seen it kind of both ways. We've seen one way where maybe you're saying, hey, we're going to really travel, we're going to spend a lot of money, we're going to keep the house that we have right now, and so our expenses are going to be really inflated. We've had other people, clients of ours, that have kind of gone the opposite direction. They're going to say, hey, we really want to retire, we want to make this early retirement happen, so for the first 5 or 10 years, we're going to buy an RV, sell our house, and travel around, and we think we can really bring down our expenses. So everybody's going to be a little bit different in this, but really think about, what are some of those things that are most important to you, and what are those expenses going to be in the early part of retirement. And then later, we may spend a little bit less. We may travel a little bit less after full retirement age. And so what are those expenses going to be at the full retirement age, and how that all compares to one another? So we can see, where we started from. What are these expenses right now? How do we kind of envision things changing as we go into the early part of retirement? And then what do we sort of see that looking like as we go into the later years? So as we put this together, what we're really going to want to do is we're going to really want to figure out, again, how much money it's going to cost us in each of those phases. And since we're talking about retirement here primarily, we're going to try to figure out how much is that going to cost? And maybe it's going to say we're going to have $100,000 of expenses, let's say in our early part of retirement. As we get to full retirement, maybe we'll say that maybe goes up a little bit. Maybe we're going to spend a little bit more money as we go into full retirement. So maybe that's $120,000 a year. Again, your numbers are going to be completely different. Some people might be saying, hey, how the heck am I going to live off of $100,000? And other people think that's the greatest thing ever. But you want to look at what those expenses are going to be for that early and full retirement age. Now, once you've kind of identified how much money you think you're going to need to spend in those different phases of retirement, what we can do now is sort of look at your assets and see if your assets are basically going to be on track. And there's just a couple real broad, basic ways that we can do this. First of all, we might look at some of the what we call predictable income that you might have, and that's going to be things like Social Security, could be a pension income. You might have rental properties or some other type of income that's coming in. And what you're going to do is say, okay, I need $100,000 a year. I have pensions and things like that are going to be about $60,000, and I have $40,000 left over. That's my retirement gap. Now, something you may have heard about, we've talked about it on the channel as well, seems to be pretty popular, is something called the 4% rule. The 4% rule basically says that if I want to have a pretty good chance that my money is going to last me for the rest of my lifetime, that I want to limit any withdrawals from my retirement assets to 4% or less. Now, there's obviously a lot of discussion out there. So a lot of people are saying 4% may be too high, that we should be using a 2% rule or a 3% rule, or all kinds of different studies that are out there. But if we stick with that 4% rule, what that basically tells us is that if we have a $40,000 gap, we're going to need to have $1 million of assets to generate that $40,000, kind of assuming that 4% rule is going to be a good way to go with that. Now, that's a really basic way to look at this, and it's a very high-level way, not really getting into a whole lot of detail there, but it is a way to sort of get an idea of just basically, is your retirement on track? Are you, kind of in the right ballpark there for having enough money to do the things that you want to do in retirement? And there are certainly things that you can maybe do online. We've got our retirement course. A full-blown financial plan is certainly going to get into a lot more detail there. There's things like taxes and inflation that really haven't been considered here with that, but at least this is going to be a good start. All right, so how do we start to bring this together and really prioritize some of our goals like we talked about earlier in the video? Well, there's going to be some big levers that we're going to be able to move that's going to kind of swing us one way or the other that could bring us a little bit closer towards our retirement. And it's going to be really important for us to prioritize those goals and the things that are going to be most important to us. It's also something that I think you want to really make sure that you're talking with your spouse or your partner, significant other, and really making sure that you're all on the same page. Kind of a funny story here. It's been more than once that we've sat down with a couple for our first financial planning engagement, and one of the people in the couple is surprised to learn that their retirement age is different than the other person, and most often it's like, well, why am I working 4 more years than you are, that sort of thing. So really make sure that you're on the same page when it comes to all of the different goals that you have when everybody's retiring. And what's more important? Is it more important to retire early or to have more money to spend? And those are going to be the two biggest levers that we're going to be able to change here. So those are going to be our first 2 levers. Number 1, when we retire, and number 2 is how much we spend. And altogether, there's going to be 4 primary levers that we're going to talk about here, but those are going to be the 2 biggest. And probably out of the 2, as you're getting closer to retirement, how much money you spend in retirement is probably going to have the bigger impact. And for those of you that may be a little bit further away from retirement, changing up that when you retire is going to have a bigger impact. And so, kind of the joke I always kind of tell myself is that I could retire tomorrow if I wanted to, but I'm not going to like the amount of income that I'm going to be able to live on for the rest of my life. And that's why we continue to work, is because we haven't accumulated the assets necessary to live the sort of lifestyle. So what we're really trying to do here is to create some balance. In other words, we don't want to be saving so much money towards our retirement that we're failing to live life today, putting all of that stuff off towards the future, saying that, hey, maybe when I retire, I'll be able to take that trip or do this thing. So really creating that balance, I think, is going to be very important. And as it relates to kind of moving those levers, really understanding which of those two levers are going to be more important. Now, you can move both of them. You can retire a little bit later and spend less money if you need to, or you can retire earlier and spend more money in some cases. But for most people, one of those levers is going to become a little bit more of the priority here. So this is something that I would recommend working out with your partner and really sitting down and figuring out which of these two levers are going to be most important to you. So for some of you, you may say, hey, we really want to retire earlier, even if it means we have a little bit less money to spend in retirement. For other people, maybe you have this idea of what retirement's going to look like, and there's a certain cost to that, and that's the most important thing, and it might mean that you have to work a little bit longer to achieve that. So for each one, it's going to be a little bit different, and you might even look at some other big levers within that could help to get you a little bit closer to that. So you might be looking at that retirement lifestyle and saying, hey, we're just coming up a little bit short, but we want to retire earlier. So what are some of the other big things that you might be able to change? Maybe it's downsizing your house, and maybe that's something that a lot of you may already be thinking about. But if you downsize the house, that might bring you a little bit closer towards that goal. So everybody's going to be a little bit different, but those are going to generally be the two biggest levers that we can move here. Now, the last two levers are going to be a lot smaller in terms of the impact that they're going to have on your retirement situation, especially for those of you that are going to be closer to retirement. And that's going to be how much money you're saving towards retirement. And, if you're 25 years old, how much money you're saving is going to have a huge impact. But if you're in your 50s and you're planning retirement sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, as you get closer to retirement, that's going to have a lesser and lesser impact there. Obviously, with being closer to retirement, fewer years to save that money. But for some of you here, and as maybe your cash flow opens up like we talked about earlier in the video, maybe the mortgage gets paid off, the kids move out of the house, it might just very well free up a lot of free cash flow that you could start putting into some of those investment accounts. So you could increase your saving, and of course that's certainly going to have some positive impact. For other people, like we talked about earlier, that balance of living life today versus postponing it for the future, you might be looking at your retirement and saying, hey, our retirement looks really great right now. I love my job. I really don't want to retire. I feel like I'm maybe a little too early to retire. You might be able to say, hey, we can cut back on the savings. We don't have to be quite as aggressive. We can start spending some of that money right now and do some of those fun things. So everybody's going to be a little different there, but putting more money away from retirement is going to get you a little bit closer to that goal. The last one is going to be something that we really don't have a whole lot of control over, but that's going to be your returns, or how much money you're making on those accounts. And of course, the stock market's going to do its thing. It's going to go up, it's going to go down, and we don't have any way to really control that. But what we can do is we can control, to some degree, our asset allocation. And we might find that maybe by changing some of the investments a little bit, maybe trying to get a little bit better rate of return, might, of course, bring us a little bit closer to that. Now, again, this is going to be one of those things, especially as we get closer to retirement, it's going to have a lesser and lesser impact of that. And it certainly by no means means that you shouldn't start taking on a huge amount of risk so that you can try to get a big rate of return if you feel like you're a little bit behind in your retirement savings. But you may find that there's going to be certain pockets of your overall asset allocation for retirement that may be able to be optimized just a little bit better. So as you get closer to retirement, one of the things we really want to think about, some things we've talked about in other videos, are what are those cash flow needs that you're going to have. And generally, as you get within maybe a couple of years of retirement, we want to start thinking about maybe how much money you're going to need for the first couple of years of retirement. We usually recommend having about 2 years of your cash flow needs in something liquid, something very safe, something that's going to be readily available for you to be able to generate that cash flow that you're going to need for some of those expenses. Additionally, you maybe want to think about the next 3 to 5 years of cash flow needs that are going to be still something very safe, relatively liquid, maybe something interest-bearing potentially, but something that could help to kind of replenish that first bucket. Everything else theoretically could be in something that would be a little bit more long-term or growth-oriented, but you definitely want to keep some of that cash flow concerns in check there and make sure that you at least have some money set aside from that. Now, beyond that, you may determine, again, everyone's going to be a little bit different, and you're going to have, of course, a risk tolerance that you personally are comfortable with and how much risk you're willing to accept with regard to your portfolio. But you may find that some pockets of your portfolio may be a little underutilized, and you may be able to rediversify some of that, maybe get some money that wasn't working very well for you, and maybe get a little bit better rate of return. You may have old accounts, maybe an old IRA account or something that's been hanging out there for a while and really just hasn't been earning very much. So really working towards optimizing some of that can really be very beneficial as you go into retirement. You may want to consolidate some of those accounts together even. So everyone's going to be a little different, and certainly not telling you to take on a whole lot more risk as you get closer to retirement, but really look at the whole big picture and see if there are some areas that may be underutilized or under-optimized within your portfolio. So that's it. So those are going to be some of the biggest levers that you can change and maneuver, to help you get a little bit closer towards some of those retirement goals. So hopefully you've enjoyed the content in the video here today and got some great information. Once again, if you want to learn more about what we do, and especially our retirement planning course called the Retirement Time Machine, you can head over to retirementtimemachine.com, learn a little bit there, and if you like, you can sign up to receive the notification for when we're doing our next enrollment for the Retirement Time Machine. Thank you, and we'll see you back in our next video.